All right, well, we're going to be talking this next session about conflict resolution. I'm sure when a lot of you saw that was the topic, you started thinking about big conflicts that you've been involved with. We've all had a lot of them. And the one that really came to my mind, I've been involved in church leadership most of my life. I've been a departmental manager in a Fortune 500 company. So when I say I've been around a lot of personnel conflicts, I've seen them. But this is the one that jumped to my mind. This really started because of what room a Sunday school class was meeting in. Literally, we had an adult Sunday school class that was meeting in our church auditorium, and it just wasn't working out. We needed the auditorium freed up during that Sunday school hour. So the Sunday school superintendent goes to the teacher, let's call him Al, and he says, hey, Al, we just need to have you move from the auditorium to this other classroom because the worship team needs to get in the auditorium, things like that. Al says, no. And the superintendent says, well, what's the problem? Al says, this is my room. This is where I'm having my class. So they talk through it. Al's not budging. He's not leaving the auditorium with his class of like 15 people. He wants to hold the 300-seat auditorium hostage. Superintendent comes to me. I'm the deacon chairman at the time. And at that church, we didn't have elders, so the deacons kind of were involved in more of these things. And he said, hey, Al's not willing to leave the auditorium. Can you talk to him? Like, great. This unpaid deacon chairman job is well worth the headache. I'm like, sure. So I go to Al, like, hey, Al, actually I call him. I say, Al, what's going on, man? He's like, it's my room. Click, hangs up. I go, this is off to a good start. My negotiation is successful so far. So I wait a couple days, I call him back, I'm like, Al, seriously, what's going on? I said, we need to talk about this. He's like, no, this is my room and I'm staying. Click. Well, in the meantime, the next day, Al decides he needs to go talk to the Sunday school superintendent again. So he goes to the Sunday school superintendent's day job, walks into the guy's office, kicks the door open, and starts banging on the table, screaming at him about how dare you take away my room. So this makes its way back to me. So like, okay, well now we got to have a more serious conversation. So I call Al, like, Al, it's me again. We need you to come in and talk with the pastors and deacons. This has gotten pretty serious. I mean, now you're like refusing to do what we need you to do. You're going to a guy's office and screaming at him. He said, I will only come if the head pastor personally invites me. Click, hangs up again. This is great. So I call the pastor. I'm like, look, man, can you call him? So he calls him. So we're going to have this meeting. So at this point, Al has gone to the office and screamed at the guy. He has found the pastor and screamed at him in the church hallway. And now he's coming into this deacons meeting and with the pastors and the deacons. And going into that meeting, I seriously am wondering if Al's going to come shoot the place up, right? Because he's just like not being rational. And I sat there waiting for him to walk into the room, and my thought is, how did it ever come to this? Why am I sitting here literally fearing for my life? Why am I fearing we're looking at a church split over this? All because of a room assignment. How did we get there? And just to finish that story, he came in, we met with him. He said, I just kind of laid out, hey, we need to talk about these things. And I said, we feel like we've all agreed it'd probably be good for you to take some time off from teaching your class. And he said, I don't even get to share my side of the story. And I said, well, when you screamed at the pastor in the hallway and went to the guy's office and screamed at him, when you refused, when you hung up on me, I feel like we know your side. And he stood up and left, and we never saw him again. Left the church, he was gone. And we were able to move the Sunday school room at least. They went to the new place. But the question is just, how did we get there? And that's what we want to talk about. How, and I'm sure you've all had these kinds of conflicts too, where you're thinking, how did we get to the place where people and their parents haven't spoken to each other for years? How do we get to the place that churches are being ripped apart over something that seems inconsequential? How do we get to the place where my neighbor and I might see each other in the yard and we both look the other way and won't speak to each other? How do we get to the place where coworkers can't work together? And that's where we're going to go through. So today we're going to be looking at practical ways to keep it from coming to that. That's what this is about, is conflict resolution. And I talked about being a church leader. I talked about being a departmental manager. The other thing I would say, I come from a family with Appalachian roots. So when I say I know what a blood feud looks like, trust me, I've got family members who have not spoken to each other in decades because somebody insulted somebody at a wedding 30 years ago. So I have seen this kind of stuff, and we're going to talk about how do we keep these things from getting there. So let's take a look at what we're going to talk about here today. We're going to be looking at the high price of conflict, right? I want to convince you we need to end these things as soon as we can. We're going to talk about what causes it. We're going to talk about how to stop it before it starts. Like, what are some situations you just need to let it go rather than making a fight out of it? Then we're going to talk about the core of conflict resolution, which is called, I'm going to call those the 4 Gs. Then 5 steps. That's going to be the meat of what we talk about. 5 steps you can follow to work through a conflict. Then we're going to do a case study. I'm going to have all of you help with a situation that's a real situation I've been in, and we're going to use what we talked through and have you advise on that. And then lastly, if we have time, I want to talk about when do you know that it's time to just part ways with somebody? Honestly, that's just, we need to keep our distance. And that is last for a reason. We're going to work through everything else first. But let's talk about the high price of conflict. I want to be clear about this at the beginning. If your life is one that is characterized by constant conflict, something's wrong in your Christian walk. Right? That should not be what a Christian is known for. The Bible makes clear that followers of Christ should be the ones leading the way in conflict resolution. Look at what Jesus taught in the Beatitudes. This is a list of the Beatitudes where Jesus said, blessed are. Now just go down that list real quick. You've heard these a lot in your life. I underlined some key words. When you look at what Jesus told us in the Beatitudes, what is the theme you see emerging? Do you see a theme of vengeance emerging there? Do you see any kind of theme of owning your opponent in an argument? No, what you see is a theme that talks about meekness, being merciful, being a peacemaker, and even at the end, those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake. Sometimes we just have to be the one who suffers because we're serving other people. Jesus taught us about deference to others. Then look at what Paul wrote in Ephesians 4, 1 through 3. Paul says, I therefore, a prisoner for the Lord, urge you to walk in a manner worthy of the calling to which you have been called, with all humility and gentleness, with patience, bearing with one another in love. And then verse 3 is the key one here. Eager to maintain the unity of spirit in the bond of peace. Paul is urging us, be the ones promoting unity. Be the ones promoting peace. If you are not doing everything you have in your power to live at peace with people, you're violating what Scripture tells us to do. That doesn't mean there won't be some conflicts, but you should do everything you can to head that off. And let's talk about the cost of this, because in addition to that, it's just our duty as a Christian to be peacemakers. We also have a look at conflict comes at a really high cost. And you've all experienced this. We've all been in these situations, but let's just talk through there. You have to think about, if you're going to be in a conflict with somebody, calculate the cost of that. Think in your mind, what's it going to cost me to keep this going? When there is a protracted legal dispute, who are the only beneficiaries? The lawyers, right? They're getting paid by the hour. They like it to drag out. Everybody else wants to settle that thing before it gets to court because it is costly to keep these things going. So when you're in a conflict, you're going to be bled of resources. And what are the specific things you're going to be robbed of in a conflict? Well, number one, I would say witnessing opportunity. There are so many professing Christians who will loudly uphold the right doctrine, and that's great. Absolutely, be right in your doctrine. But there's so many people who will hold up this doctrine. They will hold up rigid cultural standards, and they will be absolute monsters in their personal relationships. We've all seen this, haven't we? People who have all the chapter and verse right, and they are jerks, as Andy said earlier. We live in a culture war era right now, and Christians seem to think that the only way to share truth is to be angry and insulting. That's not what I see in Scripture. Stand up for truth, but Andy talked a lot about this, but we have to do it in a loving way. To have that attitude is completely against what the Bible teaches as signs of a Christian. 1 John 4:19, I'll throw a whole bunch of references as we go here. 1 John 4:19 says, if you love God and hate your brother, you are a liar. That is straight ahead. If you are hating someone, don't tell me you love God because he says you're lying. Love me, you will love other people. And the world notices this. The world absolutely notices when Christians are chewing people up and spitting them out, especially when it's Christians against Christians. Famous quote from Mahatma Gandhi. He said, "I like your Christ, I do not like your Christians. Your Christians are so unlike your Christ." Close to home, isn't it? And I'm going to share another quote. Bonus points if anybody can tell me who that is, because I would have had no idea. This is Michael W. Smith. He's a Christian singer. Now, only Pastor Trevor is going to give you Gandhi and Michael W. Smith on consecutive slides. That's range, okay? But I watched a documentary recently on the history of Christian music since the 1960s. And Michael W. Smith was telling a story about how one of his colleagues in the music business had a downfall personally, made some bad choices in a marriage, and how just the Christian community just pounced on this person, tore him to shreds. And he said this in that documentary, really stuck with me. He said, "I've been around rock fans and country fans and CCM fans," meaning contemporary Christian music. "The difference is rock fans and country fans are more forgiving." What an indictment of Christians, that is what he experienced, that the meanest people he was around were the Christians. So it is robbing us of the reputation of the gospel when we engage in conflict. Next thing it robs us of would be time. That's an easy one. Think of all the hours. When you're embroiled in a conflict, think of all the time you have to spend talking about it. All the time you spend talking to the person you're fighting with. All the time you spend talking to everybody else about the fight you're having. All the time that you spend laying awake at night and thinking about it. It robs us of time. Have you ever had a really lousy coworker? No, never, right? Nobody ever has. How much time did the rest of the team spend talking about that person? A ton. It's a giant drag on the operation, and conflict is the same way. The next one I would say is it robs us of our energy. That's very similar to time. I'm a military history fan, so I'm going to quote from a guy named Sun Tzu. He's an ancient strategist, and he said this about warfare, but it applies to conflict too. When you engage in fighting, if the victory is long in coming, then men's weapons will grow dull, and their energy will be dampened. If you lay siege to a town, you exhaust your strength. There is no instance of a country having benefited from prolonged warfare. Can all relate to that, can't you? Just think about all the resources you're using up. A few years ago, I got to tour the Wisconsin Badgers football locker room up in Madison, and I saw this sign up there that I've always remembered: "No energy vampires allowed." You all know an energy vampire or 10, don't you? These are the people who just suck everything out of the team with their attitudes. And that's what conflict does. It's an energy vampire that just takes it out of us. And ultimately, this is really what you have to think about. Who loves to see that kind of a drain taking place on Christians? Satan, right? Satan would look at us and say, "Look, it would be great if I could get you to abandon Scripture. I would love it if you could stop preaching sound doctrine, but if I can't get you to do that, I'm going to engage you in this Vietnam-like quagmire where your whole energy is wasted on fighting." He loves that. He's going to stir that pot and keep us tied up in that so he can distract us from doing our mission for God. So it is a tactic he's going to use to make us less productive. Okay, so we set the stage. I want to give you a couple of book picks. These are listed at the end of your handout, so you have to write it down. I just want to give credit. A lot of what I'm going to talk about is going to come from these books. This is a guy named Ken Sande, who's known. The thick book is the one called The Peacemaker. The thinner version is Resolving Everyday Conflicts. So a lot of the principles are going to come out of there if you want to go back and look these up. And specifically, I wanted to share, this is his chart. So we can take a minute to let this sink in. These are our potential responses in a conflict. So he's structuring them. In the middle are the peacemaking responses. On the left side are the escape responses, which he calls peace faking. On the right would be the attack responses, which he would call peace breaking. So in the middle there, you can see all these terms. These are all the good ways we can try to work through things in terms of, on the left, all the way to overlooking it, to negotiating through it, to having accountability. On the left, these are the ones, this is really popular here in the Midwest. We love some good passive aggression in the Midwest, don't we? We just like to not deal with stuff, and that's this left side. So it starts with denial. We're just going to pretend this isn't happening. We're just going to not deal with it. Flight would be the next one. We just avoid the situation. All the way to the extreme one would be, the ultimate escape would be, I'm going to commit suicide. I just don't want to deal with it. And then you go over on the right, that's the flip side of that is, no, I'm gonna be aggressive, I'm gonna attack somebody, I might sue them, all the way to the extreme example would be, well, I'll just outright kill them. So right, those are on the far poles. So do any of those jump out at you? What are the most common responses that you tend to see? Is any one of those more common than other? Depends on a person's personality, doesn't it? I mean, some people, they want to fight every single time. They're gonna wind up on the right side of that dial at all times. But for a lot of us, it tends to be more on the left side of that. So let's talk about how we get into these messes. What causes this stuff? Well, there's a lot of reasons, but there's a few universal ones. And I think understanding the process of how we get into this is gonna help us understand our own motives and also understand the motives of the people that we might be dealing with. We're gonna talk as we go about, Andy already talked about looking at yourself a lot, and I'm gonna say the same thing several times. So we're gonna talk about looking at yourself first and then trying to understand the other person. And either way, whether it's yourself or the other person, these are the factors you're gonna be looking for. The first one is straight out of Scripture, James chapter 4, 1 through 4. This is a famous verse about this. James chapter 4, verses 1 through 4. James writes, "What causes quarrels and what causes fights among you? Is it not this, that your passions are at war within you? You desire and you do not have, so you murder. You covet and cannot obtain, so you fight and quarrel. You do not have because you do not ask." So where are these things coming from? Our own sinful desires. And we're gonna unpack this a little bit when we talk about idols in a minute. But sinful desires, right there, we always start there. What's driving this? I want something sinful. It's been said that pride is the mother of all sin. And I think there's a lot to be said for that statement. Think about whatever is going on, track it back. How did that get going? It was pride because of something that I wanted for myself. So we have to start our discussion by looking at prideful responses that might be at work within me or might be at work in the other person. And this is fundamental to the gospel. Because of Jesus, he never would have died for us if pride had gotten in the way. This is from the book of Philippians. He humbled himself, even the death of the cross. So pride always has to go out the window if we're going to resolve this. Next common cause is simply a difference in goals and expectations. We each want something different from that situation. And sometimes we don't even realize we want something different until, boom, we hit head to head. Example of this, I learned this in literally, I think, my second week of being married. Second week of being married. We come from our honeymoon in Hawaii. Everything's great. We go back to work on Monday. We work our first week, each to our jobs. Saturday morning comes. I get out of bed on Saturday morning, and I do what I always do on Saturday morning. I get my gym bag. I get my basketball. I'm going to go play hoops with the guys. So here I come in our newly married apartment, waltzing down the hallway with my bag, and my wife's like, "Where are you headed?" It's Saturday morning. She's like, "I know, what's that mean?" I said, "I'm going to play basketball." She said, "You're married now. We're going to spend Saturday together." Conflict, right? Different expectations. And you can start to really see where that could go because all of a sudden it's like, well, first of all, I want to play basketball, but second of all, yeah, you don't get to tell me what to do on Saturdays. I'm a grown man. Oh boy. Second week, here we go. Start working it out, right? Different expectations. We worked it out mainly because my back got bad. I don't play basketball anymore. So problem solved. What examples? Anybody have one? Different expectations? Something like that? Different goals, different expectations? What's that? Parenting, yes. I thought we were going to raise the kids this way. No, I thought we were going to do it this way. Just think of day-to-day marriage stuff. I thought I would be able to sit on the couch and relax tonight. Nope, that's a different goal, right? And that can really turn into a conflict. Lots of those things. I thought I was going to have my Sunday school class in the auditorium. No, you're not, right? These are all just different expectations. Next one would be competition over limited resources. This is just the human condition, right? Everything is a competition for resources fundamentally. But think about that. This is why countries go to war many times, but this is also why people go to war. Because there is a limited pie and we each want our slice. And that pie can be made of a lot of different things. Often it's money. Anybody here ever been involved in an estate battle with your siblings yet? Well, you probably will be at some point. It's kind of inevitable. It seems like families go through this. They're fighting over money. They're fighting over property, right? I each want my piece. That could be credit. And I don't mean money. I mean, I want credit at work. Where's the tension coming from in the office? So often it's like, you want credit and I want credit, and we're competing for the attention of the boss. That's a battle because it's a limited resource. Children will fight over this because they want mom and dad's attention, right? We're all competing over limited resources. And then lastly, very similar to the goals and expectations, just a misunderstanding. And I don't mean a misunderstanding about the goals and expectations as much as I didn't understand what you were saying when you said that to me. So many marriage conflicts are about the way each person communicates. And one says, I heard you insult me in this way. And the other person says, that's not what I said though. Yeah, but that's what I heard. And all of a sudden, boom, there it goes. And it's a misunderstanding. Maybe the first person did not even mean it that way. So these are all things we're gonna dig through as we think about why is this conflict even happening? Which one of these is in there? Because if we can figure that out, we may be able to get there quicker to a solution if we can understand what is the core cause. Now I wanna talk about idols of the heart here for a minute. An idol, it's easy to picture a pagan idol, a little statue that somebody's worshiping in the jungle somewhere. But we all have idols, right? They're everywhere. They're ever present in our lives. And an idol is anything that is giving us our identity and our meaning. It's anything that becomes the driving motivator in our life. So think about that for a minute. It's something that gives me identity, it gives me meaning, and it drives my life. What does that sound like? That's a God, isn't it? That is what the God is supposed to be for all of us. So what an idol is anything that knocks God off his pedestal and puts itself there. So anytime I start drawing my meaning and identity and motivation from something besides God, I am an idolater, and that's gonna be trouble because we are taking a role reserved for God alone. Martin Luther said, to whatever you give your heart, I think this is it. To whatever you give your heart and entrust your being, that I say is really your God. And actually, I should have lowercase g. Okay? So we have to be very aware of this, that our heart idols will take over. And think about, really make this practical in terms of anything being somebody's God. Whether that's a material thing they're after, a reputation that they're trying to protect, a goal that they're trying to achieve, it becomes all consuming. And let's just use a little bit, let's talk about our last session's topic. In our culture right now, for many people, the God is whoever I say I am, and my thoughts are number one, right? That is their God. Whatever I want is the God that drives me. So think about how insulted someone gets when I tell them, your thoughts are not perfect. And they get outraged and they jump on you like, how dare you tell me I'm not right about who I am? Why are they getting so outraged? Do you get outraged when someone uses Jesus' name in vain? You'd better. Well, that's what you're doing. You're blaspheming their God. So they're reacting with righteous outrage because you are insulting the thing that gives them meaning. That's why they're reacting so strongly. Just like we would react very strongly to someone who's telling me God isn't real, the Bible's not true. Well, you're insulting the God that gives me my whole life meaning. So that is an idol that people are putting up there. So you think about just that fervor that people lash out with when their little God is insulted. You block me from the praise I deserve at work, how dare you? You are standing between me and my God. Praise is everything that motivates me. I am going to have to burn you down if you get between me and my praise. That's the only thing I get my identity from. How about my kids? I want my kids to turn out perfectly. Good goal, but if that is my entire identity and driver in life, it's an idol. And if you get in the way of my kids turning out perfectly, I'm gonna have to lash out at you because that's the only thing that gives me identity. They're all recipes for conflict. And the thing about idols is Satan's not stupid. That's my deep theology for today, okay? Satan is not stupid. He is smarter than you. And he will never put an idol in front of you as with a big arrow goes, look, here's an idol. Look at me. No, it presents as something good. An idol presents itself as a good thing, and they follow a progression. And this is really important because this is really key to that initial question, how did it come to this? How did we get here? We're fighting over a room in a building, and I got a guy leaving the church, and I'm afraid he's gonna shoot me over it. What happened in the middle between those things? And this shows some of that. So this is a progression of idols. It starts with I desire. I just want something, okay? Nothing initially wrong with a lot of those things, because it might be a valid thing. I want my kids to turn out well. That's a good thing. I want intimacy with my spouse. That's a good thing. I want to have enough money. Nothing wrong with any of these things, right? They start there, but then the problem is they start to morph. I desire becomes I demand. So now it becomes something I must have, not just something it would be great to have. I must have it. I am convinced I deserve it now. Paul Tripp, he's written a whole bunch of books. One thing he says all the time is a good thing becomes a bad thing when it becomes a controlling thing. A good thing becomes a bad thing when it becomes a controlling thing. And that's what just happened there. The good thing, that desire might have been a good thing, but now it is bad because it's starting to control me because I demand that I have it. And there's so many examples of this. I just wrote down some statements that are evidence of something that has turned from a decent desire to a demand. Talking to the kids that are laying around on the couch playing video games and watching TikTok while you're working your rear off. I work so hard for kids, I deserve a little bit of appreciation from you. I desire to be appreciated, but now I'm demanding it. And now I'm lashing out because I'm not getting what I think I deserve. This is one I literally have heard out of people's mouth. Parents of adults, okay? Talking to grown people, and the parent is saying to the grown person, the Bible says you should respect your parents. You need to do everything I say. I desire my kids to follow my advice, even when they're grown. Now I'm demanding it, and it's becoming a conflict. Here's a good one between spouses. Let's say it's the guy. You know how much I love to play golf. You know how much I love to hunt. You know how much I love to watch football. If you cared about me at all, you would rework your schedule so I can do the thing I love. Don't you love me? I'm demanding now a nice to have. Or someone who's being told they work too much. I am just providing for our family. That's why I work so much. Don't you want me to do that? Isn't it a good thing that I care for my family? Desire has turned into demand. And then from that point forward, well, now I have to judge people if they're getting in the way of my demand. Because you're getting in the way, and I'm just gonna have to tell you you're wrong at this point. Now I start judging. And when we condemn others for what we consider to be their failing, by our standard, we are taking God's role. And this is the problem that goes all the way back to the Garden of Eden. What did Satan tell Adam and Eve? He said, God doesn't want you to eat that fruit. Why? Because you'll be like a God if you do. That was the whole promise. Eat this. Don't you want to be a God? Who wouldn't, right? And that's what we do. We are constantly creating our own little universes. This is a Paul Tripp idea. We're creating our own little universe where I get to be the God of it. And in my own little universe, I get to make all the rules. And if somebody comes into my universe and messes it up, I got to bring down the thunder like Zeus, right? I'm judging because it's my universe. You can't come in here and tell me what to do. It's mine. And I am judging people. And then that leads naturally to I punish. Now I'm going to make you pay. Because you've gotten in the way of what in my world is absolute, because I get to make the rules. You're the way. I have to punish you. Well, what's punishment look like? It can come in a lot of forms. I mean, it can be very obvious. I mean, this could turn into like physical abuse or something like that. Emotional abuse would be very common in a lot of situations. I'm gonna make you pay for that. And again, here in the Midwest especially, we can take this in a very subtle way. How about the cold shoulder, the silent treatment? This is like playbook 101 for husbands, right? Fine, I'm just not talking anymore. If you're gonna be like that, I'm out. I'm just going silent on you. This is how you wind up with husband and wife living together like roommates, but they have no actual marriage anymore. because I'm punishing you by taking away my involvement in that relationship. Has anybody here ever been cut off by a friend or family member and you don't even know why? Yeah. It's like, why are you ghosting me? What happened? Why don't I get invited to things anymore? And they just won't even tell you, or they're punishing you because somewhere in there, you violated their chain of their idol, whatever it was, and they're not even telling you what you did wrong. It's pretty hard to solve a problem when you don't even know what it is. Well, ridding your heart of idols, that would be a whole session on itself. We could talk about that for a long time. I just want to give you a couple of book recommendations. I think these are on the list of books we recommend to our small group leaders. I know Gospel Treason is. I've worked through these with small groups, and they're both really good. Brad Bigney and Tim Keller, very similar books. And I will warn you, if you start down the path of gospel treason, the screw's gonna be put to you. It's tough, because it will really help you realize the things you're idolizing. So I'd really recommend going through that at some point and being ruthlessly honest with yourself about what is motivating you, and that's gonna help you start to ferret out some of these conflicts you might be involved with. Okay, so let's talk about, oops, I gotta go back. We've got a fancy new iPad controller here. So let's talk about stopping conflict before it starts. When should you let this go? That's the question. When is it worth the fight? When is it not worth the fight? And the Bible gives us some guidance on this. Go to 1 Peter chapter 4, verses 8 and 9. First Peter chapter 4, verse 8, Peter says, above all, keep loving one another earnestly, since love covers a multitude of sins. Show hospitality to one another without grumbling. Love covers a multitude of sins. That means I'm gonna let a lot of stuff go if I love other people. And then 1 Corinthians 13:5, this is a passage you've heard a lot. This is the famous chapter describing what love looks like. It's actually verse 7 is what it should be, 13:7. Love bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. We could do a whole sermon on that one verse. But just go through that list, bearing all things. I'll just take this one. I'll take the hit because I love somebody. Believes all things. I'm looking for the truth in this situation, right? And I'm gonna cut you some slack if I know what you meant, okay? I know what you said, but I know what you meant. I'm gonna believe the truth. I'm gonna believe the best here. I'm gonna hope all things. I'm gonna hope this turns the corner soon. I'm just gonna let it play out rather than getting initially offended, and endures all things. Again, I'll put up with some things in order to keep this relationship healthy. That's what love looks like. So when you see a conflict starting to brew, I would ask myself some questions regarding, is it worth it? We talked about that earlier. Is this worth it? Do I want to go to war on this thing? Thinking through that high price of conflict. Again, I limit myself to no more than 2 war metaphors in a presentation. But think back to World War I. You hear these stories of these armies fighting for months for like 25 yards of ground. And historically, we look at it like, that's insane. What was going on? Germany and France couldn't figure out this was not worth 100,000 lives. Well, look at your own life sometimes. And it's like, what were you fighting about again? Was that worth it? All that sacrifice to win this one little thing, whatever it was that you were fighting about. People destroy relationships over things. I mean, I was a departmental manager at a company full of creative people. If you think that's not a conflict waiting to happen every single day, I literally saw people like going to war in the office over the font selection in a document. Well, why was that? It started at I desire, I like this font better than that font. And it rapidly became, you don't respect me, do you? You've never respected me. You question every creative decision I make. And pow, you went to war over a font. Was that worth it? You got to think through those things. I've seen deacons, Christian men, respected Christian men, sabotage a church budget because somebody insulted their kid in high school 10 years ago. True story. It's crazy. How do we get here that people are doing things like this? sounds ridiculous to an outsider. But when we're in the middle of it, we can't see past our own idols in those situations. And once the battle lines are drawn, it's really hard to back off because of our pride. I want to save face. If I give in to you, well, then you won. And it gets really hard once people have made statements, and this massive issue becomes a giant pride monster that's very hard for us to get out of. And here's one other thing to consider. Before you go into a war in a relationship, it may not be about you. You may not even be the problem. They may be throwing it at you, but think about what else is behind this. What else might be motivating this action? A lot of people you see as being a total jerk, they may not even intentionally be trying to act like a jerk toward you. They may be acting like one, but why? I'm going to take it extremely personally, right? I think they got out of bed today just to make my life miserable. But think through what might be behind that. The source of conflict, they might be reacting out of fear in some form. Like, I don't know what's going on in their head. I don't know what happened in their past. Maybe they got hurt in the past. And this situation reminds them of something that happened in the past, and therefore they're just ready to strike. I've seen this one a ton, and that's over the years, that's what I've learned to think through a lot. It's like, okay, this clearly sounds like somebody did you really wrong in the past. I'm not gonna do that, right? I am not doing that to you right now. Help me understand what was that back there that's making you so fearful or so aggressive in this situation. They may not even understand the situation. We talked about that at the beginning. I'm gonna show you a quick video here. I first saw this in an MBA class at Drake University where they're trying to teach us how to manage people. This is a training video that Chick-fil-A put out. It's kind of cheesy, don't get me wrong, bear with me. But I saw this, I think, 10 years ago. And I still think about it, and I've seen a ton of other companies make videos like this. It is just, the Chick-fil-A executives wanted all their employees to think about when somebody walks into a store, what are they bringing in with them? So my MBA class called that the world's saddest Chick-fil-A. And there's a lot of baggage in that restaurant. But you get the point, right? I've seen hospitals use videos like this too. They're just trying to say, just understand everybody's walking into the room with a bunch of stuff going on in their life. And I think through this, if you've ever had somebody just snap at you in the hallway, you're like, whoa, that was way too intense for me asking where the coffee is or whatever. Something might be going on in their life. So I really try and think through that. Before I wade into a big conflict, like let me just back up and see, maybe it wasn't even about me, that they're having a bad day or there's something I need to ask them about. And as I've gotten older and as I've gotten wiser and more sympathetic and empathetic, I am amazed at how often my anger for somebody just fades away if I just ask them, what's going on? What happened? Because the minute they start telling me like, well, okay, I understand why they were snippy with me. I understand why the font was such a big deal to you yesterday, because it wasn't about the font, it was about something else. So if you just take the time to hear them out, that can de-escalate this stuff really quickly if we do that. So when should you let something go? I put it like this, if the answer is no to any of these questions, let it go. Is this about more than just your hurt pride? No, it's about my pride. Okay, let it go. Right? If that's all I'm doing is saving face and being prideful, I need to let this thing go. Is the offense seriously dishonoring to God? Lots of times the answer to that is no. Has it permanently damaged a relationship? Really think through that. If it's having that kind of consequence, then we probably need to address this. We got to wade into it. And is it seriously hurting other people? Well, then I'm going to have to deal with it. But if it's not, and a lot of the things we go to war over, probably the answer would be no to most of that. And we just need to let those things go. Okay, so let's talk about first steps. Oh, I forgot one more. Is it seriously hurting the offender themselves? This would be kind of in the intervention category, that friends need to step in this person's life and talk to them because it's really damaging their life. Okay, so now let's talk about the basics. Ken Sande's book has the 4 G's. I call it the 5 G's because I added one. These are the things you really want to work through before you get into conflict resolution mode. Work your way through these. And the first one, this is the 5th one I add, is the gospel. Start there. Matthew 6:12, this is the verse that I preached about a month ago. This is in the Lord's Prayer, where Jesus says, you should pray, forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors. The gospel is you have been forgiven. Go and do likewise. If you start with that, that is going to head off a lot of problems because I'm going to be much more merciful when I look at the incredible mercy I've received. And I'm not going to re-preach the whole sermon, but it's out there. That's the gospel. The other thing about the gospel is you're not going to be able to resolve conflict effectively unless you have a transformed heart. We all have sinful hearts. We all want our way. This is the Romans road. This is Isaiah. This is throughout the Bible. We're selfish at our core. But when we get saved, we have a transformed heart. We become a new creature, and we have the Holy Spirit at work in us. So conflict resolution starts with, I'm a transformed being because of the gospel, and I'm going to constantly think about how much I've been forgiven. This is going to go a long way in conflict resolution. Number 2, glorify God. 1 Corinthians 10:31. I may be quoting the King James here because this I memorized as a kid. Whether therefore you eat or drink or whatsoever you do, what? Do all to the glory of God. Go into every situation thinking, am I going to glorify him in the way I handle this? That's the only reason we are here, is to glorify him. And oftentimes, glorifying God means trusting his sovereignty. That if this thing doesn't go the way I want it to go, I trust him. He's in charge. He knows better than me, and I will glorify him by saying, you are greater than me, your ways are higher than my ways, and I will trust in your sovereignty. And remember that God, part of his sovereignty is using conflict to grow us. He is going to change us through these situations that he brings into our life. John 13:35 says, people will know we are the disciples of Christ because of the love we show. Conflict is a place to show that. Go back to what I said at the beginning about our gospel witness. We're destroying it oftentimes when we don't show love. that we don't show grace. Demonstrate that you're a Christian by showing love in the conflict you're in. Luke 6, 32 through 36. Jesus says there, you love the people who love you. Good for you. Sinners do that. How about you love the people who hate you? This is how we glorify God. We run counterculture. Andy talked about this a lot, right? Show people love. Don't show them hate, show them love. You got to tell them the truth about what they're doing, but that doesn't mean we don't show love as we do it. And then James 1, 2 through 4, famous passage about trial. Trial doesn't work on us, James says. It works patience in us, and it transforms us. So glorify God when you're facing a conflict, because know he's probably using this not just to resolve whatever the issue is, but to turn you into a person that's more sanctified like him. And then think about your witness through all of that. Think especially in the workplace. If you've been a vocal Christian and they know what you believe, what do they think when you're the biggest jerk in the room during a conflict? Makes you think, oh, I'm never going to tell them I'm a Christian. That way I can be a jerk, right? No, put that flag in the ground. So I'm a Christian, I follow Christ, and then that's going to require you to display that when you're having conflicts in the workplace. What do your unsaved neighbors think? Have you told them you're a Christian? And then they ask you what you're doing for Thanksgiving. You're like, yeah, I haven't spoken to my parents in 5 years. What do they think of that? These are all witness situations that we have to be aware of. And this often boils down to the old classic, what would Jesus do? Ephesians 5:1 says, be imitators of Christ. Christ sacrificed himself for us. Let that drive our behavior. And even beyond the cross, Jesus was patient with his disciples. They let him down all the time. They didn't get what he was trying to tell them for a long time. They fell asleep when he's in the Garden of Gethsemane. He was patient with them. Be like Christ in that with the people who just don't get it. The next G, Andy already talked about this one. Get the log out of your own eye, Matthew 7:5. Before you go and tell somebody they've got that speck of dust in their eye, get the giant log out of your own. Evaluate your own behavior before you start criticizing somebody else's. Think about, what have I done wrong in this situation? That is not our natural inclination. Somebody did something wrong and I want to pounce on that, but you have to stop and think, what did I do? Did I cause any of this? Have I been handling this properly so far? Do I have a critical attitude right now? Am I going into this with a really negative spirit? Am I overly sensitive? Does this fall in the category of stuff I just need to let go? Have I been sinful in any of that? And you may need a third party involved to help you see that. Isn't it the worst when you go to complain to somebody about somebody else and they're like, dude, you're the jerk in that situation? Sometimes we need that. We need somebody to say, hey, I don't think you're handling that right. We need to be open to that kind of feedback. We need to look at our heart idols. What have I elevated in there to a demand, and now I'm starting to punish people because of it? Someone called this, you've heard of the golden rule. There's also the golden result. The golden result says people often act the way you're treating them. They treat you the way you treat them. Proverbs says a soft answer turns away wrath. That's what that's talking about. So go into it, treat them like you want them to treat you back. And remember that exercising your rights isn't always the right thing to do. Yeah, I said that. Right? Just because you have the right to do something doesn't make it the right thing to do. Example, you may have a contract in place that would allow me to crush that guy, but should I? Maybe not, right? That may not be the right thing to do in this situation. In church situations, I've seen people where they've figured out they could manipulate the church bylaws to get their way. They can do it, but that doesn't make it the right thing to do. Even Antonin Scalia, Supreme Court Justice, he said, what is lawful is not always right. Think through that. Okay, the next G, next step we want to take then is gently restore. So this is out of Matthew 18. And Matthew 18 is just packed, okay, pound for pound in that chapter. Matthew 18 has the famous section where it tells us how to confront sin in another believer. This is where Jesus lays out, you're going to go talk to them personally, then you're going to go take another person with you. If they still won't listen, you're going to bring church leaders with you. And ultimately, if they still won't listen, we're going to make them leave the church. So a lot of us think about that passage, but look in Matthew 18, what brackets either side of that process in Matthew 18? At the beginning of the chapter, Jesus is talking about the shepherd who went out and found the one lost sheep and brought the sheep back. That's how it starts. Then after how to confront sin is the parable of the unforgiving servant. I preached about this a month ago too. This was the guy who was forgiven a fortune, and yet he went and punished the guy who owed him a pittance. So around how to confront sin, we see go and bring people back into the fold, and we see be forgiving to people. I don't think it's any accident that that chapter is structured that way. So this is how we have to look for restoration. The takeaway, Jesus does want us to deal with wrongdoing, but he wants us to wrap that in a desire to rebuild relationships and to focus on how much God's forgiven us. Have you seen a relationship restored? Have you been fortunate enough to see that happen? It can happen, and I mean, there is nothing better. I saw a church discipline situation about a year ago. A guy they walked through Matthew 18, he would not listen. He was destroying his family with his sin. People kept going to him in succession. Finally, they said, if you don't listen, we're going to discipline you out of the church body. And he said, fine. So they disciplined him out. About 2 years later, God got a hold of his heart. He repented. He changed his ways. And I got to be at the meeting when the church said, we are restoring this brother to membership in our church. And the church lined up to go hug the guy at the end of the service. It can happen, and it is a beautiful thing, and that's what we need to be looking for. How do we restore the relationship? Not how do we win the fight. And then the last G is go and be reconciled. Look at Matthew 5, 23 and 24. This one's lesser known than some of the others that I just referred to. So Matthew 5, 23 and 24. This is Jesus speaking. If you're offering a gift at the altar and there remember that your brother has something against you, leave your gift there before the altar and go. First be reconciled to your brother and then come and offer your gift. So what he's saying is if you know somebody's got something against you, go initiate reconciliation. You take the first step. And he doesn't say there if that person is right that you were wrong. He just says if they have something against you, so maybe they're wrong. Maybe you didn't do the thing they're holding against you. You still need to go initiate that reconciliation. And Jesus is saying don't come to the altar until you've gone and tried to solve that. That's how big a priority it is. We have to go to people and try and work out the bad blood that we know is between us. And when a matter is settled, reconciliation means I don't bring it up anymore. Okay? This is not going to be a dark cloud over our relationship. There's an old country music song, Garth Brooks, we bury the hatchet and leave the handle sticking out. You heard that? That's how we operate a lot of times, right? Yeah, I'm burying it, but it's there when I need it. And the minute you step in that area again, I'm pulling it out and saying, remember how you did me wrong? That's not what we're talking about. Reconciliation, it's gone, okay? Just like God sent our sins deep, they are out. That's what we have to be thinking about. All right, let's get down to the brass tacks here. So, advice on working out. This is the pause method. Again, comes from Ken Sande's book. The steps we are going to follow. And I will start with this one, even before we get into those. Stay current in your relationships. I'm sure you've all experienced this. Don't let stuff fester. I mean, that's really what Jesus just said in Matthew 5. It's like, go right now. Go right now and address that thing. Go and be reconciled. Because the longer you let something stew, what happens? Well, first of all, I get hardened in my position. Because the more I think about it, the bigger a jerk you are, right? Because I'm making the argument in my own head. It's going to get worse in my head. The longer it goes, the more people I'm going to start talking to about it. Now it's becoming a gossip issue because I'm going to go start building allies from my point of view. The longer it goes, the less I remember the facts of what actually happened. And I start doing a lot of myth-making in my own mind. So you got to stay current. Go and take care of these things right away. Okay, the pause method. The P stands for prepare. This gets said, it's easy to sound like a throwaway, but it is not. Pray. Everything has to be bathed in prayer. Everything. And so let that just sink in. That is what you have to do. Talk to any biblical counselor and they will tell you how much they pray before they go to a counseling session, and how much they pray afterwards, and how much they pray during it, saying, please just give me wisdom as I speak. It is critical that we go to God for wisdom on these things. And again, he's going to change our heart in that process. Do you know the old trick? If you're just furious at somebody, how do you make yourself get over that? Pray for them. Try it. Pray for the person you're furious at. It is incredible how it melts it instantly. Go before God with that person. So pray before you go in, and then continue to prepare. Get all the facts. Move back up. Okay, so we're going to pray. We're going to get all the facts. This could be, if you're in like a legal situation, read the documents, whatever you have to do. Just make sure you really understand the issue. And if it's more of an interpersonal thing, sort through this. What do I actually know? Literally, what do I actually know versus what am I assuming? Or what did somebody tell me about it? Make sure you have the facts. I actually understand what's going in. I heard someone say this week, people form 100% opinions based on 1% facts. For sure. For sure. Find out the facts before you go in. As you're preparing, anticipate their reactions. What do you think that other person's likely to say? That's super helpful, because that also starts you getting in their shoes. Right? How are they going to react? What do I think their response is going to be? That isn't you preparing counter arguments. It's just you seeing their side of the story. Seek counsel. I'm not saying go gossip. I'm not saying talk to everybody in the world about this. I am saying you may want to go to a trusted source for advice before you go into that discussion. Going back to what I said earlier, often that means you're going to figure out where you were wrong, and that's going to help going into the situation. Plan your opening remarks. I'm really big on this. What do the first 30 seconds or minute look like in that conversation? What am I going to say to start off? And I am a big fan of matching the person's tone. Now, understand what I'm saying there. That doesn't mean if somebody's coming in screaming, I go in screaming too. I'm not saying that. But I'll give you an example. A work situation a few years ago. We had a client who things had gone badly on the client's project. And he is furious. I mean, this could be like a $3 million problem for him. He is furious. He calls his project manager at our company, and he's just saying, somebody's got to get down here right now and help me solve this problem. And our project manager's like, hey man, how you doing? Things going well? Good. Oh yeah, it'll be fine. No big deal. And a week later, I run into the client at a meeting. He's like, I just want to tell you what I'm thinking. If I'm upset, your guy had better be upset, because I don't think he's taking this seriously. So that's what I mean. You want to help him understand, I'm taking this as seriously as you are. So I'm not going to come in hot, but I am going to come in concerned if I know you're concerned. So you don't want to open with chit chat that makes them think you're not taking it seriously. You're not trivializing their concern. So this whole preparation step, can you hear the places in there that it might stop the conflict at this point before it even goes any further? I might realize where I could do something different. I might see their point of view. There's a lot of things that could intercede at this point. Okay, so now we're going to go to A, affirm relationships. You cannot fake this. I shouldn't have to say that, but man, I've been around a lot of salespeople. No offense if you're a salesperson, but I've worked around magazine salespeople specifically. Man, they would fake genuine, but they didn't pull it off, right? Nobody was fooled. Like, I care about you. No, you don't, because nothing in the relationship has demonstrated that. So you can't fake it. You have to come in with genuine concern for them. And affirming the relationship, this is where you're saying things like, Andy touched on a lot of this, right? I just want you to know I care about you. I want you to know I do. I'm listening to you. I want this to work out. A lot of times you want to talk about your history together. That can be really helpful. Hey, we're disagreeing on this thing right now, but we have worked together successfully for a long time, haven't we? Let's review the greatest hits. Look at the things we've been through together. Man, we got a great history together. We want to keep that going. So you're affirming that relationship. You're building common ground. In our house, the phrase is, you know I'm on your team, right? Right? Spouses have to remind themselves of that once in a while. Like, no, seriously, I'm on your team. It's not the world versus you. I'm with you on this. Acknowledge when the other person is up against tough challenges. That's really helpful. Like, hey, I get it. You're in a tough spot. You don't have a lot of great options here. I can see why you're struggling or why you went the route you did. You're in a tough spot. That's going to be helpful. Next one, you, is understand their interest. Where are they coming from with this? Why do they want what they want? Take their point of view. I don't know if anybody did high school debate, but in debate, one of the things they do is they'll assign you a side and you have to argue it, whether you believe it or not. I think that's a good tactic, thinking through, okay, if I were them, why would they be saying what they are? What's the reasoning behind it? What are the pressure points that they're feeling? And this goes back to what we were talking about, what's in their head. They may not be acting for a really rational reason, honestly. Maybe they're afraid of something. Try and figure out what that might be. And keep in mind that anger, when somebody's angry and they're lashing out, anger can be like an armor. If I put on outward anger, that prevents you from seeing what's really going on with me. So I'm trying to get through what is really going on under there. And oftentimes, like I said, you're going to wind up having sympathy for that person. You might also learn something about your own motives during that. When I think about their point of view, I may say, okay, I'm not as above reproach on this as I thought I was when I look at their point of view. Then when you get there, part of this understanding interest, when you're in the discussion, let them explain their point of view uninterrupted. Shut off your inner lawyer, because they're going to start telling their side. You're like, no, that's not what happened. Just let them finish, right? Let them have their point of view, because you jumping in to your own defense as they're talking, we got to let them state their place. And something that I've found it works really well too is I try to, when they finish, I try to restate their perspective in my own words. Not that I'm not changing their story. I'm saying, okay, if I understand you correctly, it sounds like what you're saying is you feel like you're never invited to important meetings. Is that fair to say? I'm like, yeah, that's exactly it. Okay, good. Now I understand your point of view. And then I can proceed to say, well, I did invite you to the meeting. You didn't read the email, right? Whatever. But at least I've understood. They now know you heard me. Okay, so I like to restate that. That does not mean interrupting them and finishing their thought, by the way. That's not what I'm saying. Let them finish, then you restate it. And constantly be looking for shared interests, things we agree on. Because it can feel like we disagree on 25 things, like maybe we disagree on like 2. Like we have all these things, maybe this is the old, I think we're saying the same thing, or this is the old, we're trying to achieve the same goal, we're just trying to do it different ways. Find out where we share ground so we can work from there. Next, you're going to search for a creative resolution. Remember that negotiation means compromise. Compromise means none of us get everything we wanted. We each have to give something. So if we're going to negotiate, and again, I'm not talking about a sin issue here. I'm just talking about a disagreement of how to do something. We need to work through a negotiation, be willing to give something. And be ready to let go of the solution you walked into the room with. Right? I'm going to walk in oftentimes and say, the only way this is going to work for me is this. I need to go in with some options that I'm willing to accept to get there. And don't confuse what you're really trying to accomplish with a methodology, because maybe I can still get to my goal and do it a different way. Remember the book of Daniel? Remember when Daniel was taken off to be a prisoner, and the king said, you have to eat these foods because I want healthy young men. And Daniel and his friends said, how about if we eat the food that is consistent with what our God has told us to do? And if we still turn out healthy, is that okay? Right? Same goal. He's just saying, can I try a different method to get to the same goal? We have to be willing to look at that kind of stuff. In Ken Sande's book, he's got this long example that's really good about a neighbor who is fed up with their neighbor's barking dog. And the initial proposal is, you got to get rid of the dog, okay? So long, Rex, you're out. Or, what are some other options? So they work through all these other options, like, well, why does the dog bark when it does? Could the kennel be on the other side of the house so they don't see the people walking that makes them bark, right? And they walk through all these different scenarios rather than, you got to get rid of the dog or else. So be open to that. You want to avoid, let's see if I have it in here. I can't remember if I put it on your slide or not. I think I did not. Avoid what's called a false dichotomy. Have you ever heard that term? False dichotomy is it's this or this, period. There's no middle ground. We're trying to avoid false dichotomies. Things like this. If you love me, you'll let me do this. Only two choices. Because if you don't let me do it, you don't love me. Well, that's not true, right? They may still love you and still say you shouldn't do that. Any good Christian will see that I'm right. If you think I'm wrong, you're not a Christian, right? False dichotomy, right? We're creating these two sides. And just the old classic, you're either with me or you're against me. Well, can't I not be with you and have a different path, right? We don't want to set those two things up. Don't go to the nuclear option, as I call it, right? Don't just like, I'm willing to destroy this entire relationship over this thing. Don't go there. And come with some suggested paths forward. Come in saying, okay, I've got some thoughts. Maybe we could do it this way. Be ready to have those. And be willing to give them solutions that let them save face. By that I mean, you're not going in to beat them, you're going in to solve the challenge. And those can be different things. One example, I had an employee that just wasn't cutting it when I was a manager. And I called her in, we had said everything about the HR. I was like, we gotta let you go. Like, it's just not working out. And she was a really nice lady. She just wasn't great at the job. And she said, can I ask a question? Would you be willing to let me resign instead? And then, because she said, I've actually got some personal stuff I want to go do anyway. Could I just tell the team I'm stepping down to go do these projects? And HR and I put our heads together. We're like, sure, why not, right? I mean, she wants to resign anyway. And it actually kind of worked out for the good because she had it with the job anyway. It's just she didn't have the courage to resign until I was pushing it. It's like, I'm fine with her saying I'm stepping down. Let them save face if there's a solution where you can have that. And realize too, a lot of conflicts persist even when a person knows they're wrong, but they don't want to back down because I've said so much about it. So you're trying to give them a way out because they may want to solve this thing as bad as you do, but their pride is getting in the way. And then lastly, E is evaluate the options objectively and reasonably. That really goes to everything we've been talking about, right? We're just, what are all the things we could potentially do here? Be willing to give them all a hearing. Okay. These are all the slides that I should have been showing you all along. Sorry. I'm just like, hey, there they all are. It's like I swore I made these slides. Look at that. I even have false dichotomies on the screen. How about that? Okay. Let's jump ahead here. Okay, let's look at a scenario. And this is where I want you to throw me your ideas. I'm going to give you a situation. This is a real situation that I've been involved in. It's not my family, but I've talked to somebody who was in it. So I'll just read this to you, and I want your input. Ben and Jenny have been married for 12 years. They have 3 elementary-age kids. Jenny's mom disapproves of the way they're raising their kids. And then in parentheses, I put in there, even though everyone believes Jenny in the church believes they're doing a great job. My point is, Jenny's mom is wrong. Ben and Jenny are doing a good job here. Jenny's mom calls her constantly to tell her they're doing things wrong. And now she's starting to say Jenny married the wrong man. Ben and Jenny think they might just skip Thanksgiving this year rather than put up with this. There we go, conflict. I'm sure a lot of you have been in this one. Tell me this, what's going on with Jenny's mom? We talked about trying to understand her motives. I'm trying to put myself in her shoes. Why is she acting this way? Why is she calling her grown daughter and constantly telling her she's doing a terrible job? And by the way, I don't like the guy you married either. Guilty?
Control issue.
Control? Lonely? Jealous? These are good. Afraid? All of those are good possibilities, right? And I think those are all the things we would have to think through is like, why is she doing this? Why does she take so much joy in getting out of bed every day and making our life miserable? And so that's where we would start wanting to say, okay, if I'm going to have a conversation, let's say we think it's, in this case, we think it's probably control. Let's say that. Because, Jenny starts talking and she says, well, honestly, my mom was very controlling when I was growing up. I mean, she never let me make any decisions. I think she's still trying to control my life as a grown woman. how would Jenny, we talked about going into a conversation with her mom. If she was going to go in and confront her mom about this and say, I want to work this out, how would you start talking to somebody who you think is being overly controlling? I'm compressing like weeks of counseling into like 5 minutes. I get it, but it's an exercise.
Well, you could ask the question why.
Why?
Always ask why.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, partly I would say, well, tell me exactly what are we doing wrong with the kids? I mean, just make sure I understand what you think we're doing wrong. I want to hear that, make sure I'm clear. And then tell me why you think Ben's the wrong man in the first place. What's behind that? Because the more information we have, the more we can start to understand. Or should they just skip Thanksgiving? Who votes for skipping? Who's just like, I'm out, right? There's like, some of you are like, I'm not doing it. I hate those cranberries shaped like a can anyway. I'm not going. Plus my uncle just rants about politics and I don't want to put up with it, right? You're running away from the problem, okay? You're avoiding.
Well, it only gets bigger. The problem only grows.
Yeah, I mean, your mom's not dropping off the face of the earth here, right? She's still around in the world. You're going to have to figure something out. There may come a time when you don't go to Thanksgiving anymore, but with this little scenario, I mean, we're not there yet probably, right? We haven't tried to work through this to go straight to the left side of that diagram, just say, well, I'm just not going to come. That's good. That's okay. So what she said is we may need to help mom understand we do value your input still. Yeah, that's really good. That goes back to that affirming relationship thing, isn't it? That, hey, you've given us a lot of great advice in life, Mom. We still want your input. I just don't need you telling me every day, right? I'm a grown person now. But that is good. Some of you have talked about fear and things like that. Mom is probably thinking, who am I now at this stage in life? Man, I raised these kids and now they're doing everything on their own. Who am I? And maybe I just got to keep controlling them to have an identity. That's where I might also think about with moms, like, well, maybe what if you got like involved in volunteering or something, right? Somewhere else to go with your energy. Like you have a lot to give still in life. Just don't give it to me every day, right? Maybe there's somebody else that would be really valuable, right? Yeah. Josh.
I asked her if anyone ever questioned what she was doing as a parent.
Yeah, so Josh said is like, man, maybe ask her, did anybody ever do this to you and how did you feel when that was happening? That's a big one. A lot of times we do not realize, here's a big one. You ever find yourself sounding exactly like one of your parents in a way you hated? And you're like, oh my word. Was that my mom talking just now or was that me? And we don't realize we're doing it. Maybe she's doing that, right? Maybe she's replicating something that happened to her and she's not even seeing it.
Where's Dad? Get him off the couch.
Good question. Good question.
Where's he at here?
Yep. Where's Dad was the question. Where's Jenny's dad? Is he in this relationship?
During halftime, he could
Phil thinks Dad's on the couch asleep and he needs to get in the game. That might be fair. Yeah. Where is he? Man, I'd be curious about Jenny's mom's like spiritual status. What is that? Where is she at? Does she have pastors or small group leaders or anybody like that in her life pouring into her? Yeah.
Generational philosophies.
Yep. Generational differences can come into play here. Parents act differently across generations, don't they? They see parenting differently, the way it should be approached. So sometimes there might be some patience needed there on Jenny's part. It's like, well, is she really being awful? I mean, I painted this as she's being awful, but we'd have to dive into that situation. Maybe she's doing what she thinks is the right thing to do. Okay. Talk in person, yes. Sometimes that's hard to get though, isn't it? The particular situation that I'm basing this on, they couldn't get mom in the room to even have a conversation for months. She didn't want to talk about it. But that's the best thing. Can we sit down eye to eye? Sometimes bringing a third party in. Hey, could one of our counseling pastors meet with us? Could we all just get together and talk through this? I think it might be helpful to have another voice in the room that's not on either side, something like that. Okay. Good. Well, we could keep going with that. I'm going to hit the last section here so we can wrap up. When is it time to keep your distance? So this is, when do I not go to Thanksgiving anymore? And I put this at the end because we don't jump straight to this, right? We work through all that other stuff before we go to the left side of the wheel and say, I'm just not going to hang around this person anymore. Because we have to be again, go back to how patient God has been with us constantly. We got to really be patient before we just write somebody off. And it's easy to throw the label toxic on somebody. That's a really popular word in our culture right now. But we have to remember this, that disagreeing with you does not equal being toxic. That's a big one. There's a lot more to it before I label somebody so much trouble that I don't think it's good to be around them anymore. And just disagreeing on stuff is not that. But Jesus did walk away from people in the Gospels. One book I read counted more than 24 times that he said, you know what, I'm moving on. He would tell the disciples, wash your feet of that town. Keep going. So sometimes he did do that. And even note, if you want to read this sometime, Matthew chapter 12, toward the end, Jesus did not let family drama interrupt his mission. His brothers didn't believe in him. His disciples would say, am I not supposed to bury my parents? You want me to follow you? Shouldn't I bury my parents? Their parents weren't dead yet, by the way. They were using that as an excuse to stay home. So Jesus would not let family drama get in the way. He'd say, this is the mission we have to do. So family drama, I mean, the example we just gave, that's often one of the most effective toeholds toxic people use, because they're going to play on your love like it's a fiddle, aren't they? They're going to say, you love me, you better do this for me. If you don't do this, you're not respecting your parents. If you don't do this, you don't love me. Don't you have any loyalty? So we have to be aware of that. But toxic people do exist, and they can be small in number, but they are mighty in impact. Go back to the energy vampire thing. In sports, they talk about the cancer in the locker room. I've seen a couple of toxic people take a church down. It has to be dealt with sometimes. So that's what we're talking about. So it's not just disagreement. A toxic person is, somebody mentioned control over here. Toxic people typically are very controlling. That's what they're after. You could say they have murderous personalities. They hate. They just want to hurt people. That's the kind of person I'm talking about. And these are people who will not listen. You've tried all the steps. You've done everything you can to try and see their point of view. You've tried to work through it. You've looked at options. This is a person who that just doesn't work. They just want to bring people down. And on your handout, I put in there, they delight in division like a true Christian delights in peace. Have you known somebody like that? I've known a handful of them. It's like they're not happy unless there's a fight going on. That's not biblical. There are people like that. They're about control. They stir the pot, because when they stir the pot, they control the situation. I've known a person that coincidentally, every time some family members got together and they weren't there, they had a personal crisis that they would call in and blow up that family situation. That's control. They don't want anybody having fun if they're not in the middle of it, so they blow it up every chance they get. That's a control thing. They control people by killing them socially. If I can cut you out of the loop, you don't get invited to stuff anymore, well, now I'm in charge. Because if you want back in, you're gonna have to come to me. People who say they're trying to help you, but they're actually trying to control you. These are people who say, agree with me, or you're gonna pay a price for disagreeing with. They're at that punish stage on that idol chart we showed. They are punishing people. And these are people who have a seared conscience. They're just not responding to all the things we talked about. You can't ask them for mercy. You can't shame them. They just want to hurt. And when somebody's in that place, you probably need to keep your distance. That's what we're talking about. Sometimes these Christians, they will flip Christianity on you. And say, well, aren't you supposed to forgive me? Go ahead, forgive me. And we are. See previous sermon on forgiving 70 times 7. Forgive, 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 but that doesn't mean I expose myself to your damaging behavior. Getting away from the behavior doesn't mean I'm not forgiving you. It just means I'm not going to expose myself and my family to that anymore. You only have so much energy. You don't have enough energy to waste it on people who just want to have conflict all the time. Think about the person, you all have these in your life, I know it. The person you talk to for 5 minutes and you think about it for 3 days. Like, ugh, I can't, every time I see them coming, it's gonna just take my mind space for days, because that's what they do. So a couple of scenarios. Some of these are tough. I mean, most of them are tough. That's why we're here at this stage. Think about a family that has a prodigal child, a child who's just wayward and won't listen to anybody. That child can consume, and maybe an adult child, they can consume all the energy of the family so that there's nothing left for the ones that are still here doing the right thing. Got to be really careful of damaging these people because I'm so concerned about that one. Have to think about that. Do you walk on eggshells at a family event? Because one false word is going to blow the thing sky high because of this person's attitude. That person's causing a lot of problems. Are things not getting done at church because I have to run every decision through the filter of, is it going to make that person mad? That is not pursuing God's ministry very well at all, if I have to filter everything through their reactions. So walking away isn't just about protecting you, it's about protecting your mission, and it might be about protecting other people too. Sometimes that's a decision we have to come to. In the book of Nehemiah, chapter 6, there was these two guys named Sanballat and Tobiah that didn't like the fact Nehemiah is building the walls around Jerusalem. So they started stirring up rumors about Nehemiah constantly. They said, oh, he's a warlord. He's trying to overthrow the emperor. None of it's true. And then finally, they said, here's the plan. We're going to have Nehemiah. We're going to call a conference out on the plain. He'll come out of the city and we'll get him when he comes out and kill him. And what did Nehemiah say to him? He shouted back to him, I'm about a great work. I cannot come down. This is what we're talking about. We're not going to let ourselves get sucked into these conflicts so that we can't do the work that God has put in front of us. Okay. So what does walking away actually look like? And these slides are so tiny, I can't remember what the next one. Okay, we talked about that. Protect your mission. Well, this is a good sign that I'm actually sticking with my slides. Lastly, you may need to let that person just feel the consequence of their own actions. And that consequence might be you're not going to be around family events until you stop acting this way. Might have to be a consequence. This happens a lot with people battling addiction. Honestly, sometimes the only way to get their attention is like, I am going to stop bailing you out. And I mean literally bailing you out of jail. You're not going to live here if you're going to act this way. You're not bringing drugs into this house. Things like that. These are tough interventions sometimes. They would say, you have to feel the pain because we're not going to stop it from happening to you anymore because of your actions. Okay, so what's that actually look like? What am I saying when I say walk away? Let them feel the consequences. Maybe you don't come around anymore. You say, I'm not going to visit anymore as long as this kind of behavior is going on. Coworkers, maybe I'm not going to cover for them anymore. Like the boss is just going to have to see that they drop the ball constantly. I'm not going to step in on that anymore. You're going to create boundaries sometimes in the conversations you have. We will talk about the things we have to. Maybe we have to work together. We're going to talk about that, but I'm limiting my exposure to you beyond that because you're just going to abuse whatever I give you. And then like Nehemiah, don't let them disrupt you. And the advice I would say is keep praying for the person, but engage with them personally less. Talk to God more, talk to them less. That might be the situation you're in. But that doesn't mean you don't keep praying for them. It doesn't mean you don't continue to look for a path to reconcile. Okay, I think that's it. Lastly, your connection card. We're 10 minutes early. Glad to have a discussion. We can do some quick Q&A if you want to. Fill out that card. Again, like I said earlier, if there's anything in today you've heard, like I would really like to sit down with somebody and talk about that, whether it's something from Andy's session or if it's a relationship situation you're in, you're trying to work through. We've got multiple people on staff that would love to meet with you and work through some biblical counseling stuff on that. And also give us ideas for sessions like this in the future. We want to do these on a regular basis. Any questions or comments on any of that? Yes, sir.
Just got one quick question on this slippery slope.
Yeah.
Back to that original slide. There's a line between denial and overlook. What's kind of the difference or what's the dividing line out there?
So the question is, denial and overlook are side by side. What is the difference between those two? I mean, I think overlooking is, I'm acknowledging something happened, but I'm just choosing willfully to say, I'm going to let that go. I think denial, I mean, think about a troubled family member that none of us want to admit is actually troubled. We're just like, no, they're fine. And the reality is maybe they're not, but we don't feel like it's escalated to the point that we're going to make a thing out of it. We're just going to overlook it for now. Does that make sense? I mean, it's acknowledging that it happened, but I'm intentionally overlooking it. Any other questions or thoughts? Yes.
My question is, so I can see where on my part, as a Christian, in dealing with non-believers, how do you, as a Christian, when you're dealing with a non-believer, do some of these things kind of will go by the wayside because of their reaction to what you do or say?
The question is, how much of this would apply if you're dealing with another believer versus if I'm dealing with an unbeliever, right? I think most of this applies to unbeliever if we're dealing with an unbeliever too, because so much of this is about me. Meaning so much is about what are my motives, what are my attitudes, am I acting in a biblical way? Am I acting like Christ in this situation? So regardless of what that other person is, that's on me to live the way Scripture has called me to do it. Interestingly, to your point, if you go on Ken Sande's website, he sells curriculum that is the Christian version and the non-Christian version. So he actually offers these same tips. He offers them to secular audiences. But the fact is he's drawing them directly out of Scripture. And he's not ashamed of that. He'll tell even the secular audience, this is a biblical principle. He's not going to quote the verses all along because somebody may say, well, if they don't care about the Bible, then they may not care. But the point is, it's out of the Bible, whether they acknowledge the source or not. So I think we can follow a lot of these techniques. I mean, you think about so much of this is just good relationship, common sense stuff, but we're doing it because of the way God has treated us and the transformed hearts he gives us. Any other thoughts? If not, I'll close this in prayer. Thanks for coming today. I really appreciate it. Hope this was helpful. Pastor Joel has a point. Yeah. Your baskets for your cards are at the end of the aisles. If you want to pass those baskets down, everybody can throw their cards in there. If something occurs to you about anything we've talked about today, reach out to us. We'd be glad to keep this conversation going. We covered a lot of ground, and so much of this is familiar, right? We have this in our families and our jobs and all kinds of situations. So we want to all keep working together on this. All right, let me close this in prayer. Dear Heavenly Father, we just thank you for the frontline value of Scripture, that it is soaring theology, and it is the story of who you are. It is the story of eternity, but it is also extremely practical day-to-day advice. And those two things are tied together. That because of our theology, because of who you are, because of salvation, that gives us the direction to go in the way we talk to each other every day. We just thank you for your word. Thank you for Andy coming talking about his family and their situation. And we just pray that through that discussion and through this one, that we all go forward in grace. That as John 13:35 says, that people will know us by our love. Let that characterize everything we do, that they see we are people who love others. We want to make peace, and we do that because Christ made peace between us and God. Let that always be our motive. Just ask you to be in all the lives in this room here as they go through tough situations in each relationship they have, that these things are a part of life for all of us. Help us to always be the light in the room because of Christ being the hope that we have within us. Thank you for today. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.